Hello out there in Freedom Land. Job 32 Elihu here. Welcome to another episode. Today's message is going to be on the evils of Marxism. I think this message is very important now that I've really dived into it myself. And there is some stuff that this could be like a series of messages, but I'm going to try to sum it up and the biblical response to why or why not Marxism either is or isn't compatible with the American government system. So very interesting things that I learned in preparing for this, but I can't wait to tell you here in a second. But first I want to point your direction to if you want to support this channel, you can support this channel by going to job32elihu.greentechdirect.com, and you can buy any number of those purification products. They have products that use activated oxygen and ionization to produce a plasma of electrical charge and ionization to remove allergens and other particulates from the breathing space, either by pushing them away or causing them to clump up together and fall to the floor. I got my handy dandy personal air, and there's a little, I don't know if you can see inside there, but it's got a blue LED light showing you that it's on, and the thing just, it cleans the air. I had left my car windows down when it rained, and my car smelled like trash. Couldn't get the mildew smell out of it. This thing, in just a couple hours, almost completely eliminated the smell. If I were, this is just supposed to be a personal, for personal wear. It kind of looks like a medical device, but you could just put it on your desk, you know, or put it on your pocket. But it did wonders on my car alone, just for a couple hours. So check that out if you get a chance. Lots of other products that they have on there that you can buy to not only improve your life, but to support this channel and to get more messages out there for you. So anyway, I want to thank you for supporting this channel by going there. And then I want to go ahead and dive into our message. Look, Marxism is lifting its ugly head in our country and in the world, really. And I want to understand for myself and then share what I've learned with you. So I'm going to go ahead and go to screen number 2 here with my slideshow and show you. I think I'm a visual learner, so I think it'll help you too. But check this out, from the Bible. We'll start off with Psalm 33, verse 12. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his own inheritance. And then in Proverbs 14:34 it says, righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. So there we go. As a foundation, where I want to start from is the Word of God. If we look at this just from a purely human perspective, Marx has got a lot of good ideas. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. I'm here to tell you, in light of God's Word, what is he saying, and is this a tree that is worth planting? So there's obviously an ideology that has been tried over and over again in our world, and that it is once again rearing its ugly head. And I think it's time we examine it, like I said, from a biblical perspective. Marxism, as developed by Karl Marx, was developed at a time when there was a lot of turmoil in the world. His ideas inspired many then as well as today. I want to examine it in the light of God's Word to see, is it good or is it evil? And my subtitle, of course, you see there is Why Marxism is Gaining Influence in America and Why America Must Come to Its Knees. Oh no, that's not what I wanted. There we go. I can flip through my slideshow, I hope. There we go. I want to read from you first about from Luke 6:43, when Jesus is talking about fruit. And if we want to know Marxism, we have to know who Marx was. Why? Well, I get that principle out of Luke 6:43. It says, for a good tree bringeth forth not forth corrupt fruit, neither doth a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. For every tree is known by its fruit. For the thorn of thorns men do not gather figs, nor of a bramble bush gather they grapes. Okay? So if you want to judge Marxism, You must look at the source, the principles, and its effect in the world. So first we're going to look at the man, Karl Marx. Karl Marx was German-born, Prussian. He later moved to England. You can read some of the stats there if you like. He wrote about philosophy, on religion, and the nature of the universe. He criticized the opposition of the working class and the middle class, and ventured to propose a way to get to a utopian society through communes, through communal living, which resulted in the ideology, the terminology, communism. As a person, he was a very poor provider for his family. In fact, he had, I'm trying to remember how many kids, it was like 5 or 6 kids. 2 of them died because of his poor living conditions. He was known to be not a very hard worker, didn't really, basically he was lazy. Okay, he was a lazy slob, and some people might discount that as starving artist syndrome. No, he was a horrible person. He didn't have a good work ethic, and I think he came to these ideas as a result of his character. Anyway, 2 of his children died as a result of his squandered living. His writings were financed by Western capitalists. Interesting that he couldn't finance his own printing of his writings without using capitalist money. You see, Marxist ideology was juxtaposed. It was highly, highly critical of capitalism. And he would say that capitalism is evil because property is theft, is the way he would deem it. But we'll get into that here in a second. He was influenced by Feuerbach, Darwinism, and Hegel. The roots of Marxism slash Leninism. You know, Lenin from Russia was also highly influenced in this line of thinking. And when I hear a lot of people talking, when they talk about Marxism, they also talk about the Bolshevik Revolution. So I had to do a little digging to figure out what is the Bolshevik Revolution, and I probably should have had a slide up here about that. But what it was, Lenin, when there was an uprising in Russia to get out of control from under the czars, Lenin led a bunch of people. He was actually going to try to win the election to rule in Russia, but he ended up losing the election, not by a whole lot, but he lost the election, and instead of just trying to run again or, you know, try to get in office peacefully, he ended up going to war. So as a result, instead of going peacefully, he went to the extreme of getting violent. He used violence to get Marxism, Lenin's Marxism, to be in power. And this is what's called the Bolshevik Revolution. This happened, I believe it was in the don't quote me on the year. But anyway, the bottom line is, when Lenin was in power, he found that while he was in power, he had to continue to kill his political enemies to maintain his power. So that was kind of a bad deal. Another thing that Marx also said, and I'll be quoting him here in a little bit too, he was really opposed to religion. He thought that religion, you might have heard it said that religion is the opiate of society. That actually came from Karl Marx. And here's another quote from him: "The first requisite for the happiness of the people is the abolition of religion." He thought religion was actually created by capitalists, if you can believe this. He said that religion was created by capitalists to keep the working class down and under their control, while the rich got richer and the working class continued to produce capital for those in charge. Obviously, capitalists did not invent religion. They may have created some religion. I can't argue with that fact for all religion, but I don't think Christianity was created by capitalists. I think Jesus went to the cross not to make somebody rich, but to save humanity if they would believe. All right. Karl Marx is also known for writing the Communist Manifesto in 1848. He wasn't the sole author, but he was the co-author, and he was promoted. He was encouraged to write it because of the drive. People had this longing for socialist ideals and they wanted to put it, to codify it into kind of a constitution, or kind of a manual, if you will, for everybody to be able to go by. And so as a result, he wrote the Communist Manifesto, which was published in 1848. Some Marxist beliefs, of course, he said religion is the opiate of the masses. He believed that religion, of course, was created by the capitalists to keep people under control. He believed in no private property. In fact, he said that property was theft. To own private property was theft, because he didn't believe that anybody should own anything, that everything, all the property, is the property of the state, or the state would be the collective of humanity. So it's kind of a humanist, materialistic viewpoint. And I don't know about you, but I'm trying to imagine if my car, for example, was owned by the state. I don't know how that would work. I'm sure we would work out the details, but I can't imagine somebody coming along and just needing my car, and, well, it's not mine, it's the state's, so they just take it whenever they want and bring it back whenever they want, or I guess I'll just take somebody else's car, because it's really not their car, it's the state's car, right? I don't know how that would work. I really don't know. So a lot of questions to be answered, and a lot of different ways that people have tried over the years to make Marxism work in the world, and it really has. It's failed every time. But this was his attempt. It's a nice idea. He believed that property was theft. I said that. Private property is theft from the people. Okay. He thought ideally everyone would live communally. You know, whatever you needed, you'd be taken from the collective, and, you know, everybody's needs would be met. Sounds really good. You know, it kind of sounds utopian-like. He thought that capitalism was greed, and so capitalism must be rooted out. If we could root out capitalism, we'd get rid of all the problems, and that'd be great. You know, I think there is a little bit of greed involved in capitalism, but I did a little experiment with my kids the other day, because it is 4th of July, right? It's sporting the shirt here. We charted up some chores for the kids to do, and for every chore that they did, they'd earn a different value, $1 all the way up to $10 per chore, depending on how you know, how desirable or non-desirable the chore was. So each of our kids earned a different amount, and when it all added up, they added up to get a certain amount of money, and it wasn't just the money they were getting, it was money to buy fireworks for the 4th of July, which, what child isn't excited about buying fireworks, right? So they were all excited. Well, they weren't really excited until about an hour before we were going to leave, and then everybody's motivated, right? When you're coming up on deadlines, that's when your motivation kicks in. Well, they all got motivated. We really milked it as long as we could, and the kids earned their firework money. So we gave them vouchers. We gave them a sheet of paper that said how much money, how many fireworks they could buy, dollar amount. And just for this purpose, I said, okay, now everybody give me your vouchers. We're going to pool our money together, and we're going to get one big firework that'll satisfy everybody, and it's going to be something that's good for everybody, and that'll be that. So it was like $150 worth of fireworks, and I started asking, looking around, and they didn't seem too happy about that, because they had just worked so hard to earn their own personal, capital property fireworks. And so started asking them, I'm like, okay, well, what if we just pull all the money and then divide it up evenly among you? Everybody will get $19 or so. Well, that meant that my oldest son, instead of getting $60 worth of fireworks, he only gets $19. And so for my wife and I, we didn't do any work at all. We got $19 each. And then other kids weren't happy either. Well, by the end of it, none of them were happy about that, obviously, because I'm happy. I'm getting fireworks money that I didn't know I was going to get off of their backs, and then they were all getting less than they thought they were going to get. Principle learned, right? They all earned it, so capitalism, at least in this household, works. If I continue to implement capital or socialist ideas where we all get the same amount, their motivation is going to go out the window. motivation for this economy is what makes our economy boom. And so Marxism, that's one of the downfalls of Marxism. So if you don't see a direct result from your work, that the more work you do, you don't see any more gain, your work effort is going to go down. Okay, just something to think about, right? That might be one of the reasons that capitalism does win out over a socialist ideal. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Another thing that Karl Marx thought was that the problem of man, the biggest problem of man, it's not sin, it's not religion, it's not race, it's not reason, but he said it's class warfare, the differences between the class. He saw the differences in the working class and the middle class and how much animosity they had towards one another. He thought that was the root of all human problems. And if you could fix that problem, then everything would be peachy keen. He also came from a materialistic perspective. He was Darwinistic in thinking. He didn't believe that man had a soul. He was humanistic. He was naturalist. And when it came to ethics for Marx, he would say that it's relative to every situation. So whatever is good for the collective is good for everybody. Then that's what's good. So it takes on a very dangerous route when you have a relative ethics situation. For example, if it's beneficial to kill everybody in this area because we want their resources, and then there will be more resources for everybody else, that's the kind of argument that could be made of the relative ethics of true Marxism. So the bottom line would be the question, does it further the classless society? And every decision would be coming out of that question. Well, okay, so we talked a little bit about what Marx believes. There's a lot more there, but I'm trying to, give you the big parts to chew on, and feel free to go deeper because there's a lot to get out of studying Marxism. But Marx's influence on the world. I want to start off with Russia and the Soviet Union. Lenin was an atheist. He ran for government, lost, and he took it by force anyway. I already mentioned that with the Bolshevik Revolution. And during the Bolshevik Revolution, it's estimated that he killed 3 million of his own people. That's pretty big cost to try to make a certain kind of government work. And after Lenin died, the next one in line was Stalin, and he continued in this line of thinking with Marxism. He even once was training to be a priest, but he rejected the faith after reading Marx. Reading Marx. And Stalin, you think that Hitler was the one that killed the most people during his reign, but actually it was probably this guy. This is an evil guy. He lived from 1878 to 1953, and in his years that he ruled, it is estimated that he killed between 40 and 60 million people. Between 1927 and 1929 alone, he imprisoned 1 million. 1 million were imprisoned or exiled. 9 to 11 million peasants were forced off their lands. 2 to 3 million peasants arrested or were exiled in the mass collectivization program. 6 to 7 million people were killed by an artificial famine in 1932 to 1934. Yeah, can you imagine somebody causing an artificial famine? There were 1 million exiled from Moscow and Leningrad, otherwise known as St. Petersburg, in 1935. And there was 1 million executed during the Great Terror of 1937 through 1938. Could you imagine if just 1 million people were slaughtered in 1 year? I mean, that's a lot of people. Political dissidents, if you will. Anyway, there was also 4 to 6 million dispatched to forced labor camps. God knows how many died in the forced labor camps. 10 to 12 million people were forcibly relocated during World War II, and at least 1 million were arrested for various political crimes from 1946 to 1953. So you can see that Stalin, in order to maintain his power, had a lot of killing to do. If Marxism is such a utopian for so many people, why did so many people have to die? All right, and the next next location that Marx's influence in the world happened, I would say, would be China, would be the biggest influence. And so we have the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. In China, we have what was called the Cultural Revolution. In 1927 to 1950, the Chinese Civil War was going on, and Mao was one of the people that helped lead this revolution and succeeded against the previous emperors and the old ways. Mao modeled himself after Stalin and looked up to Stalin, and what he called the Great Leap Forward was a failure as famine killed more than any in human history before. They say 23 to 55 million people died by 1962. It's quite a bit of human life. Can you imagine? I mean, one life is bad. If you knew of a politician that killed one person, that would be a criminal you'd want to put behind bars. But this was more than just that. His goal, let me tell you a little bit about Mao, though. It was interesting to study him because, people liked him, when he was getting older, people started wondering, is he sick? Is he alive? They stopped seeing him in the newspaper, that he stopped making a lot of public appearances. And so he did a publicity stunt of swimming across one of China's biggest rivers. He did it in 3 different locations, and he swam across it, so he was known to be a strong swimmer, and that let the public know that he's still strong, he's still alive, he's still kicking, It gave them confidence in their leader. But on the 3rd swim, they made it a political event where they took pictures, they publicized it, and other people even swam with him and around him across the river. So it was a pretty big event, and it was this event that really bolstered a lot of people's support behind him, and what began as kind of his second real effort to take this great leap forward, if you will. And I'm not sure the Cultural Revolution or the Great Leap Forward, which one, if those are 2 different things or if it's kind of the same thing, but in the later part of his life, he was pushing more industrial development of the country. They were overwatering fields, and as they were pushing in industry development and farmlands and trying to really develop their country, famine killed so many people, 25 to 55 million. His goal in this new cultural revolution was to tear down the old culture, tear down the old ideology, tear down the old customs, tear down the old traditions. The problem was it became violent. He used violent techniques, violently humiliating, torturing, and even murdering anyone they accused of opposing Mao's ideas. And so one of the other interesting things about this was that they made it a law that every person in China had to carry around the little red book, which was the quotations from Chairman Mao. And so this was nicknamed the Little Red Book. If you didn't have this on you at all times, you could be prosecuted for being dissident, and your punishment would be death. Okay, so it's pretty serious to have any at that point. It's not a game. It's not there's not much freedom in that utopia. But that's how serious Marx was teaching. That Marx taught that you had to take it by force, and all these people that are influenced by him, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, they're taking Marx's word for it, that it must be done by force. And so what are they doing? Taking it by force. Well, Mao also tried to spread communism in through North Korea and South Korea, which is where we got involved with the Korean War, and as well as Laos and I think Vietnam. North Korea to this day is still socialist in that regard, and Marxist in that respect. So that's enough about Mao. There's probably lots more that could be said, but for time's sake, I want to go to the next Marx-influenced person, And here we have a quote, because some people say that Hitler wasn't a socialist. Well, it was very much socialist, and here's a quote from him. He says, "We are socialists. We are enemies of today's capitalist economic system for the exploitation of the economically weak, with its unfair salaries, with its unseemly evaluation of a human being according to wealth and property instead of responsibility and performance, and we are determined to destroy this system under all conditions." Wow, did you know Hitler said that? Like, when you study Hitler, do we really study what he taught? I mean, there's some deep stuff going on here with the ideology, and where it comes from is directly related to Marx. And I think if you take Marx out of it, it's kind of like, well, I don't know why these guys are just crazy. No, they're all influenced by this, I want to say, satanic ideology. It is what it is. And how many died under Hitler's Socialist Party? They say approximately 11 million died under his leadership. Now, I don't know if 11 million is even counting how many died during World War II, but that's a lot of people. Not nearly as much as Stalin, but still too many. All right, and other countries that were influenced by this Marxist ideal: Vietnam, Cuba, Laos, North Korea, already mentioned. In Castro's Cuba, which is our neighbor to the south in the United States, there was 4,000 to 33,000 political executions from 1958 to 1987. And for their population, that is a huge percentage. And it's no wonder that we have lots of Cuban immigrants. People don't want to live under that kind of stuff. They want to get away. They want to live where it's free. And so what do? We take them in. There's a proverb that is true. It says, as a roaring lion and a raging bear, so is a wicked ruler over the poor people. Marxism is gaining traction in the world today, and it does look like it could take hold in places, even by consent of the people. Look, I would say if that happens, look out for violence. Although there might be some people that claim to be non-violent socialists, if they're true followers of Marx, you have to look at the fruit of the tree. And the fruit of the tree is that it ends in violence and a lot of death. You cannot separate the ideology from the man. Its fruits are evident. You cannot get good fruit from a bad tree, and you cannot get bad fruit from a good tree, right? So we need to look at the fruit. So why would I be talking about this? It's important because I want to know myself, and then I want to share with you, is Marxism even compatible with the American government system? I would say, we have this motto, one nation under God. That one statement alone is repulsive to Marx's viewpoints. He is completely atheistic, and again, he said religion is something that needs to be gotten rid of. The religion, he would say, is the worship of government being the culmination of the human mind and all the human potential, right? He would say you need to worship that, humanism, right? Or self-worship even, not God. Okay, so in that respect, I would say it's completely satanic, it's evil, just on its foundation. But let alone, I mean, if that's all there is, maybe that's not enough for you, but let's look at some other stuff. Why would or would not Marxism be compatible with the American government system? Well, it's materialistic, and it's antagonism towards religion. Let's talk about the materialism real quick, because on one sense, Marxism is antithetical to property ownership, right? So how should I say this? He makes it sound like owning property is sinful, like ownership of property is theft, right? He's making that something to be shamed of, when in reality, I think that he is actually exhibiting an extremely materialistic and covetous viewpoint by looking at what other people have, and being a poor philosopher, he's probably feeling the burn, right? He's feeling it, and he wants a piece of what other people have. So he wants this utopian where everybody has the same thing and it's fair, right? It's fair, but he didn't work for it. Marxism is antithetical to property ownership. And then I want to point to the Bible on property ownership. Does the Bible have anything to say on property or owning land even, or anything like that? It does. It does say something. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that we shouldn't own things. In fact, the commandments even imply that we should. So just looking at a couple of the commandments, in Exodus 20, verse 15, it says, "Thou shalt not steal." Okay? How can you steal something if there's an assumption in that command that private property ownership exists? Because you can't steal something if somebody doesn't own it, right? If it's owned by the state, you're not really stealing it, right? Okay. And then in Exodus 20, verse 17, it's the command to not covet. Don't want what your neighbor has that's not yours. That automatically implies property ownership, right? It assumes that people have private property. And if it assumes that they have private property, there's no question about it. It's just an assumption. It is, it's a fact. He says, "Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor anything that is your neighbor's." Okay? All right. Well, there's another aspect that some people have pointed out, that they see communism in the early church. That the early church is communistic in its ways. And so really he's just doing what the early church ought to be doing. Communism and redistribution of wealth is a church teaching, right? The church should support communism because it's good. Well, let's look at that. Let's hold that thought and take a look at Acts 4:34. There's a story about Ananias and Sapphira, where they sold. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's in Acts 5. Acts 4, he says, "Neither," in verse 34 and 35, "neither was there any among them that lacked," this is the church communal existence here. It says, "For as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the price of the things that were sold, and laid them down at the apostles' feet, and distribution was made unto every man according to as he had need." Now this is interesting because, yes, they are selling their property, pooling it together, and just distributing to people as they have need. That's a really cool thing, that no one was without, But the thing is, they did it voluntarily. They voluntarily sold their property and gave it to the church to be distributed. They weren't coerced. They weren't told by government to do it. It was an act of free will. It also proves that they have possessions, right? Property was a thing that they had. So they sold them. If capitalism didn't exist back then, they couldn't sell them, right? Okay. And then the next chapter, there's the story of Ananias and Sapphira, his wife. They sold all their property, but then they lied about it, and they held some of it back for themselves. That's not really the point, but what the point is that Peter makes a comment. He says, "While it remained, wasn't it your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own power?" Talking about personal property here. "Why have you conceived this thing in your heart, that you have not lied to men, but unto God?" So there's this also assumption of personal, private property. They weren't obligated to sell it. It was their own property, and they chose to do what they wanted to do with it. They could hold some back, but they lied about it. They lied to God, and they told everybody that they gave everything they had. They forgot to tell them that they kept some of the money back. Okay. Can't deceive God. But anyway, personal property was a thing that the Bible taught. It's kind of an assumption. It's not something that anywhere was preached against necessarily. He was free to give, and he was not obligated. The cool thing about our country is that, democracy, we vote. And as a republic, we have representatives that go to Congress, make the laws on our behalf, and if they make laws, do stuff that we don't like, we vote them out. Others might say that taxation is a form of socialism. I would argue against this because taxation implies that you have an income. Taxation implies that you have something to give. You have property, and we want a piece of it, right? In Denmark, I believe their tax rate is like almost 50%. And so whatever you make, you have to pay the government 50% of that. Well, it's redistributed in the form of programs, like insurance or I don't know all the programs that they have, but it's also a capitalist economy. It's not socialist. You can start a business there, and it's one of the countries with the least red tape of any country out there. So I don't know if you want to start a business in Denmark, but at least as far as the red tape is concerned, it supposedly is a good place to start a business other than the taxation. All right. Moving on. George Washington said it's impossible to rightly govern a nation without God and the Bible. At the development of our nation, if you haven't seen the musical Hamilton, that they put a modern spin on, kind of the development of our nation from Alexander Hamilton's perspective in his life. It's really cool. I don't know how historically accurate it is, but I learned a lot watching it. And, I believe that there's a lot of different ways that mankind can come up with to create a government that works. But it is pretty evident to me that when governments intentionally put God out from the onslaught, from the beginning, God causes those governments a lot of destruction and to fail. In our beginning, people recognized the need for God and the need for morals, the need for that to come from somewhere other than government. And religion, faith, was something that they wanted to protect. So I see the influence there. I'm not saying we have a Christian nation per se, but there's absolutely the Christian influence. The reason the Pilgrims left, the reason so many people came to America was to have religious freedom. They wanted to get out. They wanted to, maybe some of them even wanted to minister to the natives there, or to start, a new church or whatnot. But what is the USA based on? What is our government? Why is our nation so blessed? We have these three separation of powers. I like to call them the separation of evils. Not because government's evil per se, but because humanity is evil in our nature. And if we're not careful, if we have absolute power, they say that power corrupts absolutely, right? So in this model, the Founding Fathers saw a lot of wisdom in separating those powers. We have the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. And none of those are just solo on their own ruling over the entire country. They all have checks and balances on each other. And this was, I believe, a providential plan that God allowed them to see. From the Bible, if you want to say, God in his word shows us that he is the lawmaker, he is the true judge, and he is the true King of Kings. I mean, these three forms of government, these three branches of government come from the idea of what God ought to be. Although government can never be God, never can replace God, but we can separate the evil tendencies of mankind by separating these different duties. So this may be the best way to restrain evil in government, although sometimes evil seems to always rear its ugly head and find its way in. It is also an anti-tyranny model. It's with that being said, we are self-governing in the respect that we, like I said, we send our own representatives to Congress and so forth. We are a capitalist in our economy. We believe in a free economy, right? The government doesn't run our companies, our corporations. Anybody who has the idea of a business or wants to, start a farm or develop a product or a service, you can start a business, and there may be laws and stuff you need to do with that, but we have a free economy. You can start a free enterprise, and your motivation is yours. Your motivation may not be money, but it's the things you can buy with money. My motivation is not to make money, but it's to to do the things money can do to take care of my family, to get to that next step, to buy that next car I might need when my current one, explodes or whatever. Our country is also friendly to Christianity. There's not too many countries that are friendly to it. Some countries have gotten so embedded with their churches, so like European countries, for example, my understanding is that they have churches that are actually funded by their state because, for whatever reason, their parishioners aren't funding them anymore. And so they had to get some sort of subsidy from somewhere, so the government has begun to subsidize the churches. I hope that never happens in America. I hope people finance their own churches here so that we can remain free. And if we need to say what we need to say, we don't have to worry about it because the government is financing us, right? We need to be free. We need to remain free. So here's my final question. Can America be brought to its knees? America must be brought to its knees, and here's why. Either it'll be brought to its knees by the continual onslaught of this Marxist ideology through consent and then violence, or we'll be brought to our knees because of humble prayer. It's going to be one or the other. If we don't humble ourselves, God will find a way to humble us, the Bible says. But I think that Marxism, as it has in the past, seems like it's defeated a lot of countries, killed a lot of people, used violence against anybody that would not go its way. And then, what fruit does it have to show? Colossians 2:8 says, "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ." So there's a warning in the Bible to be careful that lest any man spoil you through philosophy. And Marx was a philosopher, and he spoiled a lot of people because of his anti-God, atheistic ideology. Government, I believe, is from God. The Bible says that. But it should not abuse the people that it governs. Government is a tool to be used by the people, I believe, and it's a tool to be used by God. In Romans 13, 1 through 7, it says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God." The powers that be are ordained of God. So I believe that, yes, government is ordained by God. However, it has to serve the people and it has to serve God. If it doesn't do those two things, then it has to fail. And God will bring it down. But what if serving God and serving government are not compatible? The disciples in the early days, they came to a point where they had to make a choice. Either they had to serve the government in what they were doing, or they were told they have to stop serving their church, right? So there was this crossroads they came to. They were having to make a crisis of faith. And in Acts 5:29, Peter and the other apostles answered and says, "We ought to obey God rather than men." So if our government ever gets so bad that it tells us that we have to stop going to church, or that we cannot worship God, or that we cannot preach in the name of Jesus, like the early Christians faced, I think Peter's answer should be our answer. We ought to obey God rather than men. And we ought to be doing the things of God so that we never get to that point. Because nations throughout history that have stopped doing the Great Commission and following that order to make disciples of all nations, those countries imploded on themselves. And so there is an absolute necessity that we continue on that mission until God returns. Got a couple more slides here. Let's see what's on them here. Okay, there we go. So I was talking about property on that one, I think, and there's that George Washington quote. It's so important that here's another quote I forgot about. Benjamin Rush said, "The great enemy of the salvation of man, in my opinion, never invented a more effective means of limiting Christianity from the world than by persuading mankind that it was improper to read the Bible at schools. You take the Bible out of schools, you take away morality, reason, and then you have relative ethics, and you basically leading right into Marxist ideology, atheist, evil, satanic ideology. So, I'll close with this thought. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. I think we know that George Washington was a man of prayer. It really needs to continue that way. We need to have godly people in power, and so we need to pray for our leaders. We need to pray for our country. And yes, this is 4th of July, but we are not to abandon the call. And yes, it's a celebration. Yes, it's something we need to think back on. Don't just blow up some fireworks, but teach your kids a piece of history. Teach them about our founding fathers. And yes, we haven't been a perfect country, but with good people standing up and fighting in the fight, we will get better. And so I hope this message blesses you. Let me leave you with a couple more verses. Proverbs 29:2 says, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn." God bless. I hope this message blesses you. Please share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And check out my sponsors, please, that supports this channel and helps more videos like this be made. And I will see you on the next video.